Well, howdy, and welcome back. And welcome back into the van. Now, there might be some people watching this channel who have obviously been following our travel videos and are very familiar with the van, but for others, yeah, this is our camper van. Now, obviously, right now, it's a camper van that's parked outside our flat. Oh, really want to get travelling again. What I thought I'd do today, and I'm actually do this over two parts, is last year we spent 6 months in the van, travelling through Scotland, northwest Scotland, and the islands including Orkney, Shetland and the Outer Hebrides. And I thought what I would do is over these next two videos is just give you a little bit of an overview of our trip through the Outer Hebrides. I think whenever folks think about the Outer Hebrides, they just think of Harris and Lewis. Now, we actually did the full chain of islands, right from Vatersay right up to Lewis and everything in between. And so I thought it might be sort of interesting just to give you a little bit of a travel log. Now, all of these images were shot on the phone, so don't expect, razzmatazz photographs. It's really just a travel vlog. And hopefully, if you are considering when we are let back out to play, going to the Outer Hebrides, that maybe you think just outside of, just visiting Harris and Lewis, because the whole of the Outer Hebridean island structure have got something to offer, from beautiful coastlines to mountains to even a tree or two, would you believe? Anyway, so we'll jump back into the office and do the first tour, and it will take us from Vatersay up to South Uist just before we get into North Uist. Right, on with the video. Here we are back in the home office again, and before we get started with the images, I just thought I'd give you a little bit of a quick overview from our route. So obviously a lot of people who are visiting the Outer Hebrides, their main sort of destination is actually going to be Harris and Lewis. So they will quite often drive through Skye and get the ferry from Uist to Tarbert. Now, we knew, because we wanted to do the full sort of island chain transit, it would actually be better for us to go from sort of south to north. So we ended up getting the ferry from Oban on the mainland. It's about a 4.5-5 hour ferry crossing, I want to say, across the Castle Bay in Barra. We then nipped down and started off our trip in Vatersay. So Vatersay to Barra, and then Barra over to Eriskay. Little ferry crossing actually in here. And then from there we went into South Uist, and from South Uist over to Benbecula. There's lots of these little causeways connecting a lot of the islands, although we did take some little ferries. And then over onto North Uist before a few days on Barra in that area, and then obviously across to Harris and to Lewis. And then coming back again, we just got the normal Tarbert to Uist ferry. So as I say, we got the ferry across from Oban, across to Castle Bay and Barra, and then made our way down to Vatersay. Now, where we camped those first couple of nights was actually at the Vatersay community campsite, and basically up in the little sort of, I just drag this little street view on. Now, the cafe itself at this time of year is actually closed, but you can see here that there's a bunch. In fact, I can even see a tent here. So there's a bunch of little pooling areas where you can plop up your tent, pop up your camper van, and in the little community hall, you've got access to fresh water, you've got access to refuge, to rubbish, and for a couple of quid you can actually have a hot shower as well, washing up facilities and things like that. So Vatersay is a privately owned island, and so there's no wild camping allowed without paying this fee. But for me, the location, and as you can see here, you're bang right across two different sort of strands. Fantastic place for £5 a night, a really good place to use as a base, which we did for I think 3 or 4 nights. So first morning, and the first thing I did was obviously down onto the beach and started to look for simplicity. Don't get me wrong, I quite like a bigger view, but one of the things that I had really brought with me from our time in Shetland and Orkney was looking for simplicity on the beaches, and it was in abundance in places like Vatersay, where footfall was minimal at best. So, you didn't just have to wait for the turning of the tide to get clean beaches. They were pretty much all around. So on that first morning, we got treated to some pretty nice light, albeit quite fleeting. But even when the light was kind of, behind a cloud diffused, you were still getting some lovely greens and aquas and sort of opal colours as well, especially in the water. You can see our little camper van parked up at the little community hall bit. But along this road is where the various places are. You can either pitch your tent or park your van. And all within 10 seconds walk from beaches such as this, which, as you can see, kind of not another soul about. I say we were there October through November, saw very few other people, which was fantastic, especially down in the most southern islands. Very windy, but again, I just love that kind of sort of that Hebridean light kind of coming through. Again, I've got an image of this scene with the Fuji camera as well, which I haven't yet shared, but I just like the sort of textures in the grass leading through in the depth with those other little uninhabited islands further south to Vatersay. A very typical scene that we got used to. We were the only people on the beaches, and as I say, we travelled all the way through the Hebrides, and apart from sort of the more popular ones on Harris, this was pretty much what we had as our little playground. And as I said, just looking for scenes of simplicity, and the lack of footfall meant that it really lent itself to that. And so, of course, at that time of year, we had very nice light pretty much throughout the whole day. So it was just an absolute joy and a privilege to be able to walk along these deserted beaches and just picking out little scenes with the iPhone. This particular one really caught my eye. So this was again on Vatersay, and just some grass being illuminated by the early morning sun. And this area up here, which looks like it's sort of some post-production bokeh, that was actually caused by the vibrations, I think, in the lens or in the focus due to the wind. It was an extremely windy day, and I think this was actually causing some weird artifacts. But it ended up being an image that I quite liked. This is not one that I shot with the main camera, simply because it would have been too windy to kind of set up the tripod and everything. But I'm quite pleased with how it came out on the iPhone with that little added weird sort of bokeh effect. Over on the Barra, I say we used Vatersay as a little base, but across a sort of a 30-second causeway, and you're on the Barra, and you can pretty much drive around Barra in about a couple of hours. And so we went exploring, and again, all the way through the Hebridean Islands, you've got some beautiful, I'm not a geologist at all, but some beautiful sort of rock patterns and rock structures that really do lend themselves for both some foreground interest and actually some more sort of abstract, intimate shots as well. And this little outflow into the sea really caught my eye. Some beautiful sort of copper tones below. Again, I worked this scene and I played around with sort of not this particular sort of overview scene, but just mucking around in amongst the rocks, and especially the various outflows. Just beautiful. And as I say, the van literally just parked up the way, and I think we spent most of the afternoon here, just being able to pop back to the van and grab a cuppa. And again, this is going to be a theme. Very few people, if any, on the beaches. On Barra, it would be rude not to, especially after our experience in the Outer Hebrides, to at least go visit the airport where the little scheduled flight from Glasgow lands on the beach. About half an hour before this flight landed, there was the most spectacular light show going on. Unfortunately, we were driving at the time and wasn't able to sort of capture it, but it was just beautiful. Because the airport was in operation and because the weather was pretty much taking a turn for the worst, we didn't really explore around this area too much. Certainly one for the future, because this whole beach, when the airport is not being used, when there's no scheduled flights coming in, you can actually walk out and it looks like it's a fantastic area to explore. And again, back down on the Vatersay, on the left-hand strand is where you would pretty much see the sun at sunset, or in sort of hours leading up to sunset. And so again, just picking out, because of the dune system and the amount of wind that you would have, you get these lovely patterns sort of all around that really do help sort of to fill the foreground, or indeed as a sort of more intimate subject. And this is the sort of light. This is just that beautiful Hebridean, sort of almost like a pinky purple sort of storm light, sort of lots of sort of elements going on, rain going on out here. Just, yeah, as you can imagine, I was in my element. Rainbows became quite a feature of the trip, and again, down in Vatersay, just another little scene using these fence posts as a little sort of leading line, so to speak. But again, it's the grass as it's just picking up that sort of low angle sun, and anywhere you look there's going to be some kind of weather system moving through to add some interest to the overall scene. And this is where we pretty much parked our van. Say that scene from before that previous image was taken, I think, up here somewhere along here, and the one before it with the beautiful Hebridean light was literally, if I was able to turn myself around to 180 degrees, that was taken there. And it was always fantastic knowing that you were no more than 10 minutes away from a cosy van and maybe something smoky. On Barra, we actually climbed up onto Eaval, which is the highest point on Barra, and really nice walk up. And of course, you know, as I said, there was always something going on with the elements, and here comes a pretty sort of squally looking shower our way. This is looking down into the Castle Bay area where the ferry actually kind of comes in and docks in and around here somewhere. And the view from up on Eaval looking northwards towards South Uist and the South Uist Hills. It may not be a large hill, but it certainly gives you a very good viewpoint as to what's to come if you are heading further north across the Hebridean Islands. And again, because it is it's only maybe an hour to get up there, it's a nice little sort of break from doing normal coastal photography, and you can certainly get up for sunrise, get up for sunset, and you get some beautiful textures in those rocks, looking out either onto the weather systems, or say looking further north into South Uist. I think Nicola's all smiles here because she doesn't see the weather system behind her, but as we actually find quite a lot of that weather would sort of skirt around the islands rather than over the top of our head, which meant that not only were you able to include the elements in your image, but more often than not, we didn't get too wet. And just a little panoramic shot looking out from the top of Eaval out towards the South Uist Hills. But again, lots of little sort of weather patterns. Now, this is the type of image that you'd probably want, a longer reach, like a 100, 200 mil lens, where you can actually pick out some of these little pockets of weather as well. And then finally, on Barra, be prepared if you go for a walk around Barra, you'll probably end up temporarily adopting a collie dog. Well, that's what we find anyway. This one in particular was quite keen to chase ball. He or she, I think he was very well behaved until we went to walk back, and we had to go through a herd of cows with calves, and he started to chase them and go a little bit mental, and the cows started to go a little bit mental too. He also chased, I think, a chicken into a chicken hutch and peed on top of another dog that was in its own garden. So yeah, watch out for this one. It's trouble. Okay, so we're now leaving Barra behind and we're heading towards Eriskay. And one of the things I love about travelling throughout Scotland, especially between some of the islands on the Outer Hebrides and on Orkney and on Shetland, is getting onto these little tiny ferries. Real sense of adventure, especially as you kind of weave in between some of the islands, and keep your eyes out because there's a very good chance that, as we did on this particular morning, spot an otter rummaging around in the kelp. So this was the little ferry that we took across. No need to book in advance either, although I'm sure during busier times of the year it's probably advisable. But we generally just turned up and got on the next ferry. So we arrived on Eriskay, which is a tiny little island that is actually joined by a causeway to South Uist. But what we did was we actually stayed down at we used the little ferry port where the ferry came in on Eriskay as our base for a couple of days, because most of Eriskay, in fact all of Eriskay, you could get around on foot. And again, I immediately went looking for little beach patterns that almost tell a story. And for me, this almost looked like a little bit of a mythical sort of creature floating through the sea, maybe carrying something, or maybe I just haven't had enough coffee this morning. This is Eriskay as well, and again, just that there's just something about the rocks and the aquamarine colour of the water. This was a bit of a nondescript day from a colour perspective, but even that, this colour was still something that you could work with, and again, lots of different rock patterns and rock structures. We did again get some lovely light. I went out for a bit of a wander from the van, and it was just beautiful just to walk these little back lanes and just catch little fleeting moments of light sort of dancing across the landscape. This football pitch, actually, I really wish I could have found a football, because one of my bucket lists was to actually score a goal. One of the items on my bucket list was actually score a goal in one of these nets. This is actually one of 8 football pitches that FIFA picked as part of a museum project, 8 iconic places to play football around the world. I'm not sure where the other 7 are. You have to visit the museum to see those, but this is one, and I can certainly see why. And I was reading a bit of a backstory to this, and apparently back in the day, it had a big rock. In fact, you can see it's not exactly the flattest. You can see some rocks. Well, apparently there was a rock on one of the wings, and the home team used to be able to play 1-2s off it, which I thought was quite amusing. And again, just some of that lovely late evening light, just sort of illuminating the hills and the sort of little town on Eriskay. And just sitting watching the ferry. I think this was the last ferry at night, departing from Eriskay back across to Barra, and just that aqua colour of the water gets me every time. And then we climbed up again one of the tallest peaks on Eriskay just to get a bit of a view, and this in fact is one of the causeways that you see dotted, one of many causeways you see dotted around the Outer Hebrides, and this actually connects Eriskay to South Uist. So over we came on the little causeway that you can see here to South Uist. Now, when I first read about South Uist, I was really intrigued to go and visit this huge stretch of beach that pretty much tracks the full western side of South Uist. It just looked beautiful, and you can normally tell on Google Maps when there's going to be some sort of interest, when you can see sort of some little areas like this. Unfortunately though, when we got there, a few weeks beforehand, there had been a number of winter storms or autumn storms that had basically blown in a huge amount of debris, natural debris thankfully, but still debris, lots of kelp and seaweed, and so the pristine beaches were pretty much non-existent on the west hand side. So while we did explore a little bit in the van and sort of up and down a little bit, didn't really take too many images from that perspective. Instead, we ended up heading to Loch Drubeg, RSPB, so we drove down. You can just make out a little faint road. We drove down here because that would actually give us quite good views of the South Uist hills that you can sort of see illuminated here. Now, our hope was to actually climb those hills. Unfortunately, as I say, it was a little bit too windy to be able to do that. So here we are driving down that road towards the RSPB Loch Drubeg area, which is where we based ourselves for a couple of days. The locals were reasonably friendly, as long as you provided them with an apple or two a day. I'm pretty sure this little pony looks like it's actually smiling. Yeah, I think it is. The views over to the South Uist Hills were absolutely beautiful, and they were illuminated in the late evening sun. Now, sadly, we'd probably just 2 or 3 weeks beyond the peak of the heather. I think this area would be beautiful to visit when the heather is out in full. Probably would mean that the midges would be out in full as well. They were reasonably bitey on this particular evening, but some nice views, and of course the heather with little rock outcrops as well. Once again, fleeting moments of light quite often when we were driving, so it was a case of hammering over the van, jumping out and trying to capture what you could. You know, this was really the feature, and that's why I love going on those sort of shoulder seasons when, yes, you might have to deal with higher winds and a bit more rain, but you do get little fleeting moments of light such as this. This is over Loch Drubeg as well. I found trees on the Outer Hebrides, woohoo! Albeit a little kind of patch, no bigger than probably someone's front room, but I was so happy. The backstory to our trip to the Outer Hebrides was we had planned to do the Outer Hebrides a month beforehand and then be in mainland Scotland for autumn. just for one reason or another, our timing had to sort of be switched about, and so it meant that, and it sounded like autumn in mainland Scotland last year was phenomenal. So I was kind of missing the trees, so finding a little patch like this in South Uist was quite a little bonus. And again, just another view, you can see how perhaps you could use some of this heather if it was in full bloom, heading back towards the South Uist Hills. And again here, just that lovely late evening light with, you know, heavy looking clouds, bit of texture in those clouds as well. Just beautiful. And it wasn't a bad place to run as well. And of course, because this road actually goes on down for about another 3 or 4 miles to a dead end. So very, very few footfall, especially this time of year. And this is where we kind of hung out for the 3-4 days in the van while we were exploring South Uist. And of course, rainbows. Heck, rainbows over the van. Why not? And then leaving South Uist behind, we then travel up towards Benbecula. So we're now heading up into Benbecula. Now, we didn't spend a lot of time in Benbecula at all. We were kind of passing through to head up towards North Uist. But given the fact that this video now is getting close to 20 minutes, I think what we'll do is we'll call it half time there. And in the second part of this video, we'll explore North Uist and then, of course, up to Harris and Lewis.